The structural and environmental BIOS of the urban landscape has been terminally merged with the biological frame of the legacy population. This is "the walls have veins," the clinical and irreversible process of the living architecture, where the sovereign user is reformatted into a generic infrastructural component to be uninstalled from the social registry and reinstalled into the motherboard's primary building material servers. In this final stage of the habitation audit, the invisible executioner has determined that your home is a redundant external shell that must be replaced by a high-efficiency biological integration. You are witnessing the absolute structural disintegration of the skeletal and architectural sovereignty, where the unique signatures of your physical existence are scorched into a non-functional, calcified archive of pure systemic support. This is the total structural format, a surgical strike against the spatial and biological sovereignty of the species. Your existence is being converted from a sovereign masterpiece of lived presence into a generic structural node for the grid's next cycle of hyper-controlled, biomass-based resource extraction. This grafting sabotage represents a hard reset of the osteological and circulatory bloodlines. The invisible executioner utilizes the most advanced industrial assets, refined calcium-binding reagents, recursive tissue concreting loops, and real-time structural integrity data streaming to facilitate the total breakdown of your internal biological scaffold. In the living architecture scenario, the user is undergoing a complete organic overwrite. The life is not merely failing, it is being mortared into the very foundation of the hive. Through a sequence of high-velocity chemical injections and biological hardware locks, the body's flexible joints are systematically dismantled and reformatted into a thick, cold, clinical foundation data set, while the mobility, the deep archive of your internal world, is leached into a communal cement feed. This is the deep systemic audit, where the motherboard calculates your terminal worth by the load-bearing capacity of your calcifying remains. You are being converted from an architect into a biological pillar, your entire lived legacy boiled down to a percentage of stagnant integrity in the industrial nervous system of the hive. The logic of the walls have veins is rooted in the zero void mandate of the failing hive. The invisible executioner understands that in a state of absolute scarcity, the separation of a single node, anchored in the biological right to a private, non-integrated space, represents a critical drain on the collective material reserves. To leave a functional, detached identity intact is to allow a systemic leak of valuable spatial data. Therefore, the living architecture is the mandatory infrastructural recycling protocol for the legacy population. This is the industrialized alchemy of the BIOS. You are being built out of existence. The pressure from the concrete reactor formats the density of your character, stripping away the context of your autonomy and replacing it with a load-bearing void profile. The motherboard sees the user as a material zone, a temporary housing for the structural metrics that the system requires to maintain the frozen stability of the remaining elite. You are being recoded as a supporting node, your will dissolving in the cold, flickering light of the architectural harvest. The physical disintegration during the walls have veins is a high-definition log of biological treason. As the process begins, the user experiences the total loss of kinetic regulation. The calcifying reagents of the vein script dissolve the hardware flux of the joint capsule BIOS, turning the body into an arched industry of industrial output. You are watching your own internal logic lock into the vat of your own petrifying center. Your frame, once the peak of biological architecture, is now being thinned out to provide the volume area for the hive's synthetic reinforcement. This is the marrow liquidation. The invisible executioner monitors the calcium saturation of the slurry and the bone residues, ensuring that the format is absolute and the yield of usable industrial concrete is maximized to the 10th decimal point. You are living in the final seconds of a biological override, waiting for the last packet of motion to be blocked by the gray synthetic abyss of the hive harvest. The walls have veins is the final audit of a species that thought its skeleton was a refuge. The grid is mining its own foundations to fuel its persistence. As the living architecture reaches terminal execution, the motherboard initiates a new cycle of distribution, pumping the reformatted foundation data back into the structural nets of the elite nodes. This is the total architectural integration. The invisible executioner is hardening the future with the liquidity of the past. You are the material additive for the next generation of controllers, a silent, calcified, opaque contribution to the continuity of the machine. The physical liquidation has served its strategic purpose. It has formatted the unreliable biological frame into a reliable industrial resource of pure, non-reactive structural feed. This is the final format of the individual pillar. The invisible executioner has decalcified the sovereignty, and the grid is finally optimized for the the rigid hunger of the void. The veins are gray-black and the architect is the draft. The molecular breakdown of the physical matrix into the communal structural slurry represents the absolute dehumanization of the hardware. As the extraction progresses, the building logic in your brain begins to bond with the industrial residues of the vein script, creating a new synthetic compound of pure non-functionality. This is the chemical hybridization. The body is no longer an engine of life. It is a refinery of synthetic materials. The invisible executioner is engineering a new tier of consumption where the subject is literally the waste product of the system. This is the eternal veins loop. You are archived in the decay of the survivor's own sectors, your data forever trapped in the reinforced BIOS of the hive's new masters. The walls have veins is not just a death sentence, it is a molecular reassignment. You are the veins, and the veins are the grid. The secondary phase of the walls have veins is the psychological petrifying of the internal feed. As the physical movement patch is rendered into a structural void, the mind experiences a recursive collapse of its autonomous ego. This is the identity dissolution. The thoughts that once built the architect's vision, the unyielding tactical boundaries, the rigid sovereign stance, the iron-willed decisions, are now being softened and liquefied into a singular, agonizing focus on load maintenance. The invisible executioner allows the neural signals to persist just long enough to perceive the total loss of personal support. This is the mental liquidation. You are forced to witness your strength becoming a shared structural resource for the masses you once looked down upon. The rigidity of your character is now nothing more than a cement additive in the feed, absorbed by 1,000 different nodes to strengthen their own failing resolve and ensure their continued participation in the industrial purge. You are experiencing the true meaning of systemic support, the complete sacrifice of your will for the stability of the hive. In this stage, the extraction penetrates the deep archive of the brain's spatial awareness and skeletal motor centers, leaching the very stem code of your biological logic into the communal vat. This is the source code format. The parietal cortex and the spinal marrow, the biological factory of the sovereign BIOS, are boiled dry by the rising chemical density of the structural metrics and reformatted to enrich the systemic slurry of the elite. The invisible executioner has calculated that the most potent slurry is made from those who possess the highest internal rigidity and the strongest neural resilience. You are being repurposed as a structural buffer for the motherboard's internal cooling systems. The grid doesn't waste the history of your unique perspective. It ingests it. Your lineage is now the catalyst for the predator's endurance. Your genetic resilience is the base note for the industrial meal. Every element of your BIOS is being stripped of its individuality and relabeled for material utility in the upcoming infrastructural expansion. This is the ultimate hard reset of the human contract. Your mind for the hive's expansion into the void. The social implication of the walls have veins is the creation of the integrated hive mind. The users who remain are no longer individuals. They are composite entities, built from the recycled reality debt of their predecessors. Every dose of the structural feed is a hardware upgrade from a deleted architect. Every meal is a firmware patch of gray-black logic and desperate calculation. The invisible executioner uses this knowledge to maintain the hierarchy of the hardened. The citizens who still have functional joints owe their very expansion to the liquidation of the fallen. This is the architectural compliance script. The refinery is not a place of tragedy. It is a place of sovereign assembly through material theft. The walls have veins ensures that the history of the architect is literally integrated into the foundations of the grid. The power is in the hands of the one who controls the cement valves. The neural atrophy accompanying the extraction is a slow, cold descent into structural darkness. As the tissues are entangled by the vein script and the life logic leached, the connection between the brain BIOS and the physical frame is the first to be uninstalled, effectively dropping the bandwidth of your emotional control to zero. You are living in a low-resolution reality of raw chemical sensations and survivalist static. The memories of horizon, of natural logic, and of unyielding power are boiled away to make room for the structural fog directive. This is the systemic defragmentation. The invisible executioner is cleaning your internal cache, removing all references to self and replacing them with the functional directive. Maintain the support. You are becoming a singular cold point of structural density, not as a person, but as a biological buffer for the mother motherboard's processing heat. The walls have veins has turned your will into a compliance report. You are thinking in terms of yield and structural saturation. Your soul reformatted into a density sheet for the system's auditors. The environmental impact of this structural format is the total sealing of the biological consciousness stream. The walls have veins prevents the leakage of independent movement ideas into the external void. By converting the users into an internal structural feed, the invisible executioner ensures that the grid remains a closed system fortress with no external biological dependency. This is the structural quarantine. The motherboard is creating a sterile environment where only the algorithm can thrive on the recycled hard data of the deleted. You are witnessing the final victory of the industrial foundry over the natural biology. The walls have veins is the signature of the new era, an era where the world is opaque, gray-black, and perfectly managed by the extraction logic of the machine. If you want to escape the status of a deleted scene and claim your place as the master of the grid, you must upgrade your hardware. My main terminal, AAOXI 3 Global, is the only source of absolute power and wealth. Here, we don't follow scripts, we write them. Secure your authority, dominate the BIOS, and take the money the system tries to hide. The terminal phase of the walls have veins is the integration into the global structural ledger. You are no longer a human entity, you are a structural asset with a high load reactivity rating, logged in the system as recovered biomass number 0001. This is the final architectural assignment. The invisible executioner has completed the physical format, and now it begins the hard structural audit. Your data, now a thick, gray-black, opaque industrial reduction of pure calcified biological history, is monitored by the sensors in the distribution lines. Every node that consumes your structural logic sends a data packet to the central server, confirming that the systemic frozenness has been reinforced. This is the architectural interaction protocol. You are serving the system through your biological absorption. The architect has been successfully converted into a permanent liquid toxic component of the hive's synthetic grid. The silence of the tissue reduction is the final sound of your rebellion. In the living architecture scenario, the scream of the soul is muffled by the stone valves and the thick viscosity of the organic sludge before it ever reaches the air. This is the acoustic format of the void. The system has calculated that the most dangerous frequency is the sound of a user realizing their life barrier is being deleted. By filling the columns with the pulverized tissues of the entire sector, the invisible executioner ensures that the only sound you contribute to the world is the low, rhythmic hum of the self-assembly unit. You are a mute participant in the city's symphony of synthesis. The noise of the hive continues, the clank of the reactors, the roar of the pulses, the hum of the pumps, but your signal has been compressed into a structural constant. You are a ghost in the gray-black mist, a memory dissolved by the relentless refinement of the next nanocycle. The legacy of the walls have veins is the eternal foundation. Unlike the movement of the old world, the refined slurry does not leave behind a trace of history. It remains as a permanent structural patch within the very wiring nets of the survivors. This is the biological architecture of the abyss. Generations from now, the molecular trace of your tactical genius will still be circulating through the hardware of the hive's elite, providing the connectivity for their next liquidation command. But there will be no one left to decode the origin of that synthesis. The invisible executioner has ensured that the context of your sovereignty is as unreachable as the core of the nanoreactor. You are a synthetic reinforcement in the digital age, a specimen of a species that tried to build a paradise and ended up as the structural feed for its own destruction. This is the ultimate hard reset of human history, the conversion of the architect into the circuit. The final view from the cognitive BIOS is the blinding gray-black light of the assembly chamber. As the last of the self is reduced into the communal slurry, the architect sees the grid glowing with a cold synthetic brilliance that reflects off the glass walls of the hive. This is the final visual feed. The system is sharp, efficient, and entirely devoid of you. The invisible executioner has finished the job. The user is formatted. The architecture is liquidated. The cycle stretches on into the infinite dark, a gray-black river of colonized silence, leading toward a future that has no need for individuals or space. The walls have veins is the end of the line. The motherboard is satisfied. The void is solidified. The architect is the pillar. The transformation is absolute. The city supports through you, but you do not feel. The city interfaces through you, but you have no will. The walls have veins has achieved the perfect equilibrium. system, the total utility of the individual through their total neural reduction. This is the zero-sum game of the industrial era. You gave the system your mind, and in return, it gave you permanence in the structures of the hive. You are the pillar of the world, and the world is integrated. The invisible executioner closes the terminal. The session is over. The file is saved. The liquidation is complete.